Magnificent, a non-binary superhero novella by Novae Caelum. Copyright 2022 by Novae Caelum. Published by Robot Dinosaur Press. This is an auto-narrated audiobook narrated by Google's Madison. Content note. I always hesitate to put a content warning because I think it sometimes pre-colors the reading of the story. So, I'm going to put a content note instead, with both the ups and the downs ahead. This story is raw and hits on a lot of raw issues, including homophobia, transphobia, bullying, gender dysphoria, depression, and suicidal ideation. It also includes learning self-worth, coming into your own, acceptance by those you love, acceptance of yourself, finding your power, and soaring above all you've been through. It does indeed have a happy, triumphant ending. Please read with discretion, love, and self-care. 1. In 1983, when the world was busy trying not to blow itself up with nuclear war, we got the first substantial proof that humanity wasn't alone in the universe. 3 huge, sinuous alien ships descended from the sky over New York City. That's become a pattern since. These aliens can't seem to get it into their heads that New York is not the capital of the world, and demanded tribute of the Earth to their Grand Regent, who apparently had annexed our region of space 2 centuries before and neglected to tell us. Oh, and we owed them interest. The ships were terrifying, at least they were on the old accounts on TV. I hadn't been born yet. But the ships weren't what convinced everyone the aliens were real. We'd all seen Star Wars and knew about special effects. We knew about the War of the Worlds radio broadcast. We weren't stupid. These things could be faked, couldn't they? Aliens couldn't be real, could they? But we'd never, before that day, seen someone fly. A buff streak in a black and gold football jersey, which on a closer look had a hand-sewn D20 on the back, and a badly cut-out black mask, shot up from the heart of the city and disabled the engines of the ships with what we later learned was a natural ability to create electromagnetic force fields. Then he proceeded to use his fields to push the ships back into orbit, shouting a lecture all the while about how this planet was under his protection. Several news outlets with suicidal helicopter pilots and reporting teams on board managed to capture some of this speech. It was ridiculous. Ranting and full of nerdy gamer slang. That, paired with the close-up visuals that just couldn't be faked, because we had all seen Star Wars and no special effects could convincingly make the blue crackle of his electrostatic fields, drove home that this was really happening. The aliens were real. And so was the flying man in the almost football jersey and badly cut black mask. We knew he was an alien because he shouted it in his speech. I'm an alien too, you self-righteous dickwads, and you don't see me trying to conquer the planet. That was the day the world met Magnificent Man. The name was a quip from a nervous field reporter who shouted, "Oh, what a magnificent man." Because even with his blonde mullet tousled and the awful black mask and the nerdy speech, you could tell that he was, as my mom says, a stunner. That was the day we learned an alien had been living among us all along. That was the day the world met my father and fell in love with this ripped, presumably straight and cis alien hero, because everyone just assumed. But this isn't his story. This story's mine. And it's not straight and it's not cis. Don't assume. 2. If you think it was hard growing up in the 90s, with 10 kinds of neon to choose from to wear every day, and mauve, don't forget mauve flowered stirrup pants, you don't know what it was like to have 2 superpowered parents. My dad, you already know. Magnificent man. My mom you met a few years after my dad, when she revealed her icy cold streak in a rampage throughout Chicago. She and Dad fought a few times. He eventually brought her around with his good looks and bad boy charm. He was half the world's poster crush in his black gold-trimmed costume even with the black domino mask, and by then he'd lost the mullet, thank God. And the gamer slang. Which I really liked in the old interviews, but image is everything, right? Mom started out a villain, and while Dad was a little wild in the early days, no one gave his hero status a second thought. He always did the right thing. Mom was good for Dad, and he for her. She was a little more gray in a world that wasn't black and white, and never would be. My parents had 2 children. My older sister, who when she was 3 learned how to create electric bubbles that shorted out streetlights everywhere they drove, and did it for a solid year before moving on to flying around the house. And then there was me. I was skinny and awkward. They stuffed me into dresses, because that's what you did to kids who were born with my anatomy, and waited to see what powers I would develop. I was, disappointingly to everyone, an underachiever in that department. My sister started going out with Dad on heroing patrols when she was 12. She's too young. Dad had protested at first. It's dangerous out there. By then he'd segued from being America's bad boy alien sweetheart to America's suburban values alien dad. He was supposed to say things like that. Well, I was powering my family's ice cream truck when I was 4, Mom said, slicking her hair back with ice. With my stepfather around, that was hardly less dangerous. And hey, I turned out okay. Never mind that she'd been a supervillain. My sister had started to manifest Mom's cold abilities by then too, and she kept sneaking out after Dad anyway. She'd saved Dad's life more than once by encasing him in ice to cool him down from Dr. Firebright's attacks, or raising him up from the sea with an ice sheet when Alana, ancient queen of the sea elves, tried to kidnap him and make him her consort. So Dad made the conditions that my sister could go out a few times a week, and that Mom would go out on patrols with them as an extra precaution. Then he whipped out the yellowed Singer sewing machine and made them both black and gold costumes. Magnificent woman and magnificent girl. He gave Mom a flight suit he'd captured from an interdimensional super thief, so she could keep up. As an afterthought, Dad made me a costume too. Also black and gold, with the scripty gold, magnificent on the back. Just so I didn't feel left out. I knew he was holding hard to hope, making me a costume just in case I'd need it. He was being nice, being Dad. I couldn't fly or do anything with EM fields. I couldn't even burp frosty mist like my sister did way too often. My sister got to go out. Even Mom, who used to be a villain, got to go out. And me? I was just old enough to be left home by myself. Dad and Mom sat me down one night, my dad all serious while Mom danced frost across her fingertips. Now honey, Dad said, looking me in the eye as I hunched on our ratty tan and brown plaid couch. Your powers will come. You just have to be patient. Yeah, these things take time, Mom said, spinning her finger frost into a rose before crushing it again. And my sister nodded, because she worshipped them both and mostly agreed with everything they said. I nodded too, because I wanted with everything in me to believe it was true. It had to be true. Never mind that my sister got her first powers when she was small, and I hadn't shown any signs yet. I would get powers someday. I'd get to fly around with Dad and Mom and take down criminals and supervillains. Maybe I'd even get to shoot spears of ice like Mom and my sister. I'd get to help save the world. You know how much the world needs us, Dad said. And by us, he meant the 3 of them. So we have to go out some nights, and you'll have to stay here and hold down the fort. And sometimes during the day too if it's a weekend, though not when your sister's in school. My sister made a face at that, and Dad knuckled her hair. Oh come on, you need an education. You have to know math to defuse some of the bombs we come up against, and physics to understand how much force to put behind lifting a crashing plane. This job isn't all frost and force fields, you know. Yeah, Dad, I know. That feeling of almost hope in my stomach churned. I thought of my costume upstairs, folded neatly on my chair, just waiting for the day I could put it on for real. Even though I hated it, I checked it every day to make sure it was in good condition, running my hands over the slick, densely woven fabric. I tried it on most days, maybe thinking it would help spark my powers. I stood in front of the mirror and flexed my muscles, the way some of my girlfriends at school flex their chests in the bathroom to try and make their boobs grow. But I wasn't interested in that. I just wanted my powers. But I didn't have powers. And my parents and sister were living in a world I couldn't. I watched them sometimes on TV, soaring through the skies over New York. Saving people. Always smiling. And here's the whole family, one newscaster said, gathering them all together outside the still smoking remains of an apartment building, which they'd emptied of its occupants and its flames. The whole family. Dad smiled and waved. Mom looked aloof but pleased, ice crystals forming an aura around her. And my sister preened before the camera. I watched them, with fistfuls of cheese crackers, sitting on the thin carpet on our living room floor, my costume beside me, just waiting for the moment I could use it. Waiting. The invisible part of that whole family. 3. When my sister was 12, she became magnificent girl. But when I was 12, I was cornered one day after school in the bathroom by two of the tough girls. They called me a dyke as usual, and pounded me into the space between the sink and a stall. They'd been harassing me for months, but this was the first time they'd attacked me with fists. The girls punched and kicked until I had no breath. And I learned in one instant that I did have superpowers. Between blows, the world around me burst into clarity. Into colors my mind had always known, but never seen before. Cold and heat, the cold of my fear. The hot, fiery furnace of my attacker's rage. There was no thought in that moment. I tore the burning heat from the girls' hearts, and used it to warm myself. They wavered, limbs pulling back, blotched faces going slack before they both fell with twin thuds to the tile floor. Hunched in the corner, I stared at my limp attackers. I didn't wonder if I'd killed them. Not then. I was only glad it had stopped. That there was an end. The air hummed and crackled around me, still taut with the fading anger. But the crackle didn't go away. When the girls didn't move for a solid minute, I crept forward, reaching for one of their necks like I'd seen in the movies. Wondering if she still had a pulse. Hoping maybe. Or fearing. The girl's hair frizzed with static as my hand neared, and I pulled back, looking at my palm. My skin shone with a faint electric blue. My whole body was crackling with blue, an electromagnetic field, a layer between myself and the world. I hadn't had it to protect myself from the blows, but I had it now. And without really knowing how, I strengthened it. Made it so no one could hurt me. I'd been staying after school for extra credit, mostly because I was bored. Because the house was usually empty when I went home. My parents patrolling a few nights a week with my sister had become every night a long time ago. The world needed the three magnificents, and who was I to argue with that? No one else had seen the fight. I didn't reach for the girls again, but instead waited, watching with my new senses. I could still feel heat in their hearts. Not the heat of rage, but the heat of humans, of bodies, of ordinary lives. Something I'd always known and taken for granted. At least they were alive. I looked up and found, past the rapid beats of my own heart, that I could extend my senses farther. Feel the ordinary heat of people around me. A cluster of heat down the hall, drama club, which always ran late. A few people lingering in the halls. People like me, who had little to go home to. Should I hate these girls for what they'd done to me? I didn't know. Should I be happy I'd found powers to save me? I wasn't happy. I wasn't anything but numb. I stayed on the grimy floor, on guard with my senses in case anyone came near the bathroom, but no one did. I stayed until the girls started to wake, then crouched over them. I felt the strength of my EM field protecting me, and felt for the first time in a long time no fear. There was a blaze in my heart I'd never known before. An icy awareness that if I held out my hands, I could reach into their hearts and extinguish their reigniting flames, if I wanted to. First one girl opened her eyes, then the other, swearing and staring up at me in shock. A coldness of fear seeped into their hearts that I reveled in. If you do that again, to me or anyone else, or if you tell anyone about me, I will kill you. My voice was calm, filling the tight, echoing spaces of the room. The girls nodded, stammered agreement, and scrambled up and out of there. I tracked their mix of cold and heat as they ran through the halls and straight out the school doors. I even tracked them to the bus stop half a block away. I could sense that far. They never did talk. And they never bullied me again. I had almost killed them. And I'd wanted to. I realized that later, at home, when I started to shiver with the after effects. That power over them had felt good. I'd been attacked, and I'd beaten my attackers. They hadn't touched me. I'd left them scared of me. That terrified me. I'd been waiting for years for my powers to come in so I could tell my parents and join my family on patrols, but I couldn't tell them now. I'd wanted to kill those girls. After months of torment, after it came to violence and with the bruises on my arms that I covered with a long-sleeved shirt, and on my face that I covered with my parents' high-end cosmetics that they used to cover their own bruises after fights, I'd really wanted to kill them, and I didn't know why I hadn't. I closed my eyes and felt their blows raining down, heard the siren screams of their rage. Their hatred directed at me. I felt the heat I'd stolen from them burning in my own heart. That power waiting to be used. That hate wanting to destroy. Was that what Mom experienced when she used her powers? Was that why she'd turned into a villain before going over to the side of the heroes? This ability to sense heat and cold had to be from Mom. What if I hadn't just inherited these senses, but Mom's iffy morality too? I'd been so calm in that bathroom after the attack, so entirely in control. Shouldn't I have been more afraid? After the fight that day, with our second-hand computer that we finally could afford, because you could save the world every day, but no one paid you to do it, I looked up for the first time the word dyke. If someone was going to beat me up, I wanted to know why, and more than just the meaning of it. What did they see in me that they hated so much? But I didn't like girls. I didn't really like boys either. And I didn't feel like I fit with the other girls. I knew about transgender, but I wasn't a boy. None of it fit. I wasn't even fully human. I didn't fit with my partly human family. I didn't fit with the heroes. No one who was a hero would have felt what I'd felt when I hovered over those waking girls in the bathroom. I wasn't anyone, was I? Was that why those girls hated me so much? Could they see who I really was on the inside? That I was nobody? My parents didn't even suspect I had powers. Never asked about the missing makeup, never saw the bruises. But I wasn't going to let myself get caught and beaten again. I would learn how to use my powers to protect myself and fight back. I began to lock myself in my room every night, blare dashboard confessional on the stereo I'd gotten for Christmas the year before, and experiment with my new abilities. I was careful and nervous. Mom could manipulate temperatures, but I'd never heard of her being able to steal heat like I had. And maybe I was a villain, because I still wasn't sorry for stopping those girls from beating me up. I couldn't be sorry. I definitely wasn't sorry when I saw them sneer at an autistic boy in the cafeteria, then catch sight of me and stop what they were doing, going off to huddle in their own corner. I wasn't sorry at all that a few less people in my school were afraid to walk past those girls when they saw them. Maybe I was inherently wrong. An aberration. Even Mom, who was reformed, occasionally still killed people in the name of good, though Dad was trying to break her of the habit. If she was a mostly good person and still did that, what hope was there for me? I wasn't going to let myself kill someone by accident. I knew from watching my sister grow up and the pains my parents took to train her how important self-control of my powers was. I had to be in control. I hadn't been in the bathroom that day, but I would be if it ever happened again. Then, I would have a choice in how to use my powers. Then I wouldn't just react out of reflex. And if I was inherently evil, maybe I could overcome it. Tell my parents finally that I had powers. Join the family and be one of the magnificents. The dream of that day hovered above me like an accusing finger. Like a balloon I'd let go of and was always floating away just out of reach, no matter how hard I chased it. I couldn't stop reliving that fight in the bathroom. Then late one night, when I had my music blaring loud enough I couldn't hear beyond it, and I was sure my parents weren't home yet, Dad knocked on my door and eventually pushed it open. He caught me just learning how to float. Just learning that I could. He stared. I stared back, my eyes wide, chest seized with panic. Then his eyes got wet. Because his heart was so big. And he'd never given up hope for me. And mine got wet too. Because even when I hated that he and Mom loved my sister more than me, and left me alone almost every night, I couldn't not love him. He was my dad. He wasn't magnificent man to me. He was just Dad. Always and only Dad. And I'd only ever wanted to make him happy. "Honey," he said, "you got your powers." And they stuffed me into a black leotard with a gold skirt, because my sister already had the black skirt, and trained me how to use my fields to fly, and marveled at some of the new paths my abilities took, like the ability to wrap force fields around people I couldn't see. But I never truly showed them my other set of powers. That I could sense those people I couldn't see because of their heat. And that I could take that heat, if I wanted to. I could kill people with a thought. If I wanted to. 4. They called me Magnificent Lass because Magnificent Girl was taken. My debut to the world was amazing, with jets flying over Manhattan in formation. Over top of my family flying in formation, me right next to Dad, Mom just behind me, and my sister on my dad's other side. All in black and gold. All in matching black domino masks, with Magnificent emblazoned in gold across our backs. The Magnificents, they called us. All 4 of us. The true superhero family, proof that people from 2 worlds could be brought together and make something amazing. My father the alien, my mother the next-gen human. And us children, the hybrids. Both of us children. When Dad introduced me to the heroing community in their Northeast American branch headquarters, other heroes I'd seen on TV flew and swirled around the grounds in water cyclones and zipped about with orange zest teleported clouds. All for me, the newly christened Magnificent Lass, with my skirt fluttering and short hair whipping in the wind. I hadn't wanted the skirt, but Mom said without it you couldn't tell I was a girl, so. Maybe those years were good years. I think they were good years. I helped people. I went out with Dad and Mom, and we saved people, and it felt good to be powerful. Good in a good way. To be adored by the world, not sitting in the living room, watching from the sidelines. Not using my powers to steal heat or hurt people. That did feel good. It had to feel good. I went home every night and turned on my music and curled into a ball on my bed, because it felt like I was living a life that could never be my own. A life I hadn't been invited to, and still wasn't a participant of. I wore a mask, but I wore the bigger mask when I wasn't in costume. It wasn't just because I was part alien, though you couldn't tell it. It was because I was part something of everything and nothing, and I still hadn't found my place. And it was because of that day in the bathroom, which I'd never told anyone about. Every day I put on the skirt and flew around with my family and saved people and felt like the biggest fraud the world had ever seen. When I was 16, I learned the word genderqueer. I was pouring through hero fan message boards, which I did sometimes though my sister had told me not to, and maybe because my sister had told me not to, when I saw people discussing me. I mean discussing Magnificent Lass. Some idiot was arguing that I wasn't a girl because I didn't move like one, didn't act like one, that I was just a boy in a skirt. Someone else started talking about me being transgendered and a boy in a girl's body. I burned with heat at that, because I'd figured out a long time ago that no, I wasn't a guy. And then some beautiful soul tried to shut the whole argument down and said that people didn't have to be one category or another. That there was such a thing as genderqueer, and it wasn't anyone's damn business anyway what gender or sexual identity Magnificent Lass identified as. It was Magnificent Lass's business alone. If I ever find that person in real life, I will give them the biggest hug I've ever given anyone. I cried harder that night than I ever had before, clicking through page after page on gender identities on the old, humming, barely out of DOS computer in my room. Reading everything I could find, and there wasn't much, but it was there, starting to build a picture of who I was and who I might be. Having to read most things twice because my eyes were streaming. Because I wasn't alone. Because maybe I didn't fit everywhere, but at least this part of me fit somewhere. 2 months later, I told my parents I had to. I couldn't keep going out there as Magnificent Lass. I couldn't wear the skirt. It grated on my soul like nothing ever had before, and it had to change. It took some coordination to get both Mom and Dad to stand still for a moment in one room. We'd all been so busy lately, what with the third nanite incursion, and all heroes needed on deck at all times around the world. We were all running exhausted. But I asked my sister and some of her friends to take my parents and my patrols that night, and for all her self-sanctimonious faults, she must have seen something that told her what I was asking was important because she agreed without much fuss. Or maybe I was just giving her an excuse to work with her newest crush, Eterna Blade, all night. That was more likely. I sat with Dad and Mom in the living room of our tired old house, which we hardly lived in anymore. Dust coated the furniture, and the sofa was more threadbare than it had been when I'd sat there every night, but not that much more. The carpet was in desperate need of replacement, from the stream of dirt and blood we'd tracked in over the years. There was a sense of quiet in the house, though. A sanctuary from our hectic lives. A peace. Mom was still in costume, and Dad wore a blue work shirt from his plumbing job, because saving the world still didn't pay the bills, half unbuttoned over his black and gold costume. Both sat on the edge of the couch, humming with impatient energy. I sat on the hassock in front of them, hunched in on myself, picking at my nails. I'd fought hundreds of villains, but none of those battles had rattled me as much as my parents in front of me, with what I had to tell them. "What is it, honey?" Mom finally asked, blowing out frost crystals and plucking them from the air like gems. I'd never been as close to her as I was to Dad, but I knew in her own way she loved me. She was cold and a little screw-loose at times, but Dad had finally convinced her to stop killing last year, and it had seemed to stick. Mom fiddled with her earpiece, which she hadn't taken out. "A fire just broke out 10 blocks from here, and they'll need my ice to stop it." "Dad?" "Mom?" I swallowed and stood up. I couldn't sit for this. My dad, who was never Magnificent Man to me, suddenly seemed very much Magnificent Man, family values man, uncompromising morals, mostly except when it came to Mom. But he was still the role model for most of America, and much of the world. He was a hero. And he'd only ever seen me as his daughter. Maybe only ever would. Do you know what genderqueer is?" I asked. I bit my lip. My voice squeaked a little but didn't crack. Dad sat up straight. "Is it an outbreak?" "A new disease, honey. Have you been affected by the nanites? Is that what this is all about?" Fury ignited in me. Fury that had been building for years, and I hadn't expected it to come rushing out now when I needed it not to. "No," I said, and without realizing it, at least that's what I told myself, I took some of my heat, my rage, and transferred it to them. Mom stood up abruptly, hands frosting over. Dad was out of his work clothes and fully in costume before I had time to blink. "What was that?" he asked, looking around in room casing mode. His gaze snapped back to me. "Are you under duress? Is this a ploy from a villain?" "I'm not your fucking daughter," I yelled, because I didn't know what else to do, and I was scared at what I'd just done, and I was scared at what they'd think, and this was all going wrong, and it had all been building for so long. Dad crossed the room in a rush of electrostatic blue. "Then who are you?" I'd given him heat, but he was cold. Colder than I'd ever seen him. The fierceness in his eyes his enemies saw was now directed at me, and it never had been before. I took a step back. Maybe it wasn't the right time. But I was too tired. Too tired to keep wearing my masks all the time. I'm me. I'm genderqueer. He looked at me blankly and I flinched and added, it means I'm not a girl. Or a guy. I'm just sort of something different. Or maybe in between. That's what it means. I don't want to be magnificent lass anymore. Dad's eyes shifted. He took a breath and finally said, oh? Mom was beside him now, frowning, looking pissed that she wouldn't get to fight something. What do you mean you don't want to be magnificent, lass? We're a team, and we're a good team. No, I still want to be, I want to work with you. I like doing what we do. But I'm not a girl, okay? I'm a person. Not a girl, okay? Honey, Mom said, and I knew I was about to get an out-of-context lecture. Because she didn't have the context. I'd only just learned about what I was, and I'd had to dig across the internet to find out more. Because I didn't fit. God, I didn't fit. I should never have brought it up. I should have just kept wearing the mask of a girl. It kept them happy, and if they were happy, I was at least a little bit happy. I could fly with them. That was something, wasn't it? Okay, Dad said, his voice so soft it was almost a whisper. Then more firmly, and in the voice he used when pronouncing some incontrovertible truth, okay. So. We need to lose the skirt, right? I looked between them. Their faces still bore the imprints of their masks in their skin, not yet covered up by the makeup that hid the bruises and scars and helped them live mostly ordinary lives when they were around. When they had time for that. My parents, these beacons in the world. I decided, with the tiny bit of courage my dad's answer had given me, to push a little farther. And I don't want to be called she or her. I want they or them. Like, you know how you talk about someone when you don't know their name. Like that. Another blink from each of them. I knew Mom's grammatical mind was rejecting that, and her lips pressed as she tried hard not to point that out. She was trying. She didn't know what was going on, but bless her, she was trying. People don't know your name, Dad said. He tilted his head, looking at me like he hadn't seen me fully before. Maybe not for the first time in years. His eyes got a little wet. Oh, honey. We totally missed it, didn't we? We see so much around the world, but we couldn't see this. You. Come here. Yes, there was a lot they didn't see. But my dad's hugs were still the best hugs. I crushed into him, because I'd done it. I'd told him. And he still wrapped his arms around me and hugged me back. 5. The world needed my parents and me, but we took all that night, ripping out the seams of one of my costumes and one of my dad's old costumes to get enough of the expensive, damage-resistant fabric to make pants. My dad had always been the tailor of the family, letting no one else make our costumes for us. He said it was so no villains would have the chance to sneak in traps, but he lit up when the sewing machine was humming and his lips were puckered with pins. Mom had a sharp eye for fashion, and between the two of them, with me interjecting that no, I did not want a flared tunic to accentuate my curves, and yes, I wanted a little extra padding around my chest and torso to downplay my chest, I flushed at that, but Dad actually took it in stride. Between all of us, we made a new costume. One that had pants, not a leotard and skirt. Was slim, padded where it needed to be, and did nothing to enhance what I didn't want enhanced. It wasn't a costume for the world. I would wear it in front of the world, but it was a costume for me. Black trimmed in gold, with a gold magnificent on the back and a black domino mask. I fingered the mask, the only piece of the costume that was unchanged, and put it on before hovering in front of the mirror in the upstairs guest room that never had guests, so it was mostly a sewing and costume repair room. My short, dirty blonde hair rippled in the breeze from the ceiling fan, but nothing else did. No gossamer, no streamers, no skirt. My eyes stung, and I was so glad for the polarized sheen over the mask lenses. Yes, Mom finally said, it does make you look older. That's good, that adds to the intimidation factor. God. She was trying. Magnificent, Dad said. Magnificent person. Did I get that right? Is it person? Or, do you want another hero name? He waited only a moment before adding, it's still a time of crisis. Might not want to go fully off-brand, then people won't recognize and trust you. I nodded. Because what I saw in the mirror, who I saw, felt good. Felt better. Felt like me, enough that I couldn't look away. I wore jeans and sweatshirts when I was out of costume, always baggy. Always a little hunched, not wanting anyone to look too closely at my body. This costume was form-fitting. It had to be to move with me as I flew, as I fought. But I didn't look necessarily female. Or even male, really. Or maybe both. Part of me deep down inside that had been coiled for years let go of its tension. I gave myself a tentative smile. I had given a lot of thought to other names, but I really did want to keep the magnificent. I still wanted to be a part of my family, and I'd been so afraid I wouldn't be allowed to. Another knot inside of me slowly eased. Magnificent person, I echoed softly, my voice tight. Yeah, that's me. The media hated it. They sneered when my father called a brief press conference, and without any hesitation or lapse in confidence told the world that I was magnificent person. That I should be referred to with gender-neutral they, them and their pronouns. That he fully supported me, and hoped the world would continue to embrace me as one of its greatest heroes. I cried, gunking up my mask. I couldn't help it. But the world screamed. At first, when I had the chance between patrols and crises, I checked online message boards and social sites. And then I stopped checking it all. For every person who seemed to support me, 2 more asked what in the world this even meant, if it was some weird alien thing or a passing phase. 3 more said it was stupid and called me things that made me kick my computer off. My sister yelled at me and said I was hurting the family image. The grammar Nazis were everywhere. The media dredged up my mom's supervillain past and said that maybe this had something to do with her influence. They pointed out that when she'd first started her career of villainy, she'd worn pants, and never mind that she wore pants now. That at least got my sister pissed, and we all went back to the sewing machine to give her costume pants too. They brought up Mom's too recently quit habit of killing the foes she faced. They hacked up all our interviews. People picketed and rioted whenever we appeared publicly as a family. And yes, there were some who rallied for us and for me and for equality, whatever that meant in this maelstrom. And we were still dealing with the nanite crisis, and people started shying away from me when I tried to help them, like I had some alien disease, and it was too much. It was far too much. One day, after a long fight with a particularly nasty group of villains, I shot up into the sky with no other intention than to get away from the earth. I pulled as much air as I could hold into a field around me, pulled heat from the ground and stored it so I would be able to survive in the cold, something my father and mother and sister had never been able to do and didn't know that I could do. I went into orbit where I knew no one could follow me. At least for a little while. I'd done it a few times before, but never when anyone could see me, staying away from the glowing electromagnetic data streams of ground observers and satellites. I made myself quiet and cold, looking down at the earth. Blue and green and white, revolving below me. It wasn't my home. Maybe Dad's jerk parents had left him there as some drunk cosmic joke. Maybe he really was the prince of some alien nation that was trying to hide a forbidden heir. That was the most popular of the tabloid stories, but he'd made Earth his home, and the people of Earth had made him one of their protectors. Me? I caused chaos wherever I went. Better I stay away. Better for my family. For everyone. I curled into a ball and floated. It was a long time before I saw something coming toward me. A small ship, one of the hyperplanes Dad and the other heroes sometimes borrowed from their rich friends, though lately Dad had stopped using them, saying they were bad for the environment. I uncurled myself. Great. Who had Dad sent to come after me? But it was my dad's black mask that I saw through the canopy of the plane as it drew close. He waved at me to get in the second seat. Crap. I hadn't thought he'd come after me himself. I just hadn't thought about what would happen after I'd gone up in space. I shook my head, alarm growing. I couldn't open the canopy. I might be able to wrap myself in stolen heat, but he couldn't do that. He'd feel the cold of space, and it might hurt him or even kill him. His mouth tightened, and he looked like he was about to open the canopy himself, so I sped over to it. He was wearing a thin, almost transparent suit over his costume. Some kind of pressure suit. I sighed in relief before starting to hyperventilate. My air was running thin. It had been for some time. I just hadn't noticed. Or maybe hadn't wanted to notice. Dad hauled me into the seat beside him, turned the hyperplane around, and shot back down to Earth. He didn't ask me how I'd been able to stay alive in space. He didn't yell. He didn't ask why I'd gone up there, or how I was doing, and didn't offer any words of comfort. Because we both knew they wouldn't be enough. But he held my hand tightly the whole way down. After we'd landed and cloaked in a field in Pennsylvania, he finally said, "Benedita needs help in Belize. There's still an outbreak of nanites we haven't contained there. She'd be happy to take you under her wings, if you'd like to help." Benedita was my favorite hero, beyond my parents. She was more bird than human, all-feathered, midnight grace, product of an illegal eugenics experiment. She was the only hero I knew who used her real name instead of a hero name because she said she couldn't blend in anyway, so what was the point? She didn't take shit from anyone, including herself. I glanced up at Dad, swallowing hard. Though my family had been doing our best to ignore the pressure that my coming out had put on us, and the hit to our reputations, I saw more lines on my dad's face than I had before. He was ashamed of me. He should be. He was trying to get me out from under the cameras. Get me out of the way so the magnificents could be magnificent again, just the three of them. I moved to get out of the plane, the air suddenly too tight, but Dad said, "Wait." I froze, my heart racing. It was such a strangled word. His face was full of pain, and I couldn't take that look, not from him. I reached for the canopy release again. "I haven't told you where I really come from," he said. "How I got to Earth." The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. No, he hadn't told us. My sister and I learned from an early age never to bring it up. He told us the name of his species, the Jiran. But he never said more than that, or if any of the media's claims about him were true. He never talked about his life before his teenage years, moving in and out of the foster care system. He talked a lot about his love for Dungeons and Dragons, which he discovered in one of the semi-stable homes he'd had in high school, and how it made him feel more at home here. Showed him how to have a purpose. But he never talked about why he'd come or been left on Earth. Why he'd been alone as a kid, or who his parents had been. And he was bringing this up now? As a bribe to keep me talking, to keep me in the plane? I found my anger again. What does this have to do with me? Because I'm not some alien prince, he spat, his own anger heating his voice. I felt the heat within him, his rage, and anguish I sensed ran deeper than anything to do with me. My parents were small-time smugglers who ripped off anyone they came across. My species, our species, are shapeshifters. It's not something we usually can control, it's instinctual. We do it to blend in with those we deal with. We do it to conform to our visions of who we really are. I wasn't born looking like this. I don't naturally look human, not anything like it. But when I came here, I changed to fit in, because I had to survive. He stopped and seemed to be fighting for breath. I stared at him, not sure what to say. Not sure where he was headed, or what to do with this information. Why he felt the sudden need to tell me now. And why my parents left me here. He took another breath. Met my eyes. I get it. I really do. I wasn't born human, and I wasn't born. He twitched and pulled off his mask, his face sweating underneath. I wasn't born male, okay? But I knew when I was young that I was male regardless. And my body knew that. It started to shift to male, no matter what other species it echoed. My heart knew. That's taboo in my culture. When someone shifts genders, that's taboo and it's considered perverse. Perfectly fine to shift for physical survival and profit. But emotional survival? Your parents might just leave you on the nearest inhabitable planet and let you fend for yourself. I was holding my breath, staring at my dad, trying to understand. You're not. I'm male, he said shortly. I always have been, and damn how I was born or what my parents thought of it. And thought of me. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I never saw you were going through something like that too, and I'm sorry if you were ever afraid to talk to me about it, and I'm sorry I left you alone, and I'm sorry I haven't been here for you now. Not enough. I get it. I do get it. He gripped my hand again, nearly crushing it. I really do. And I know why you were up there, partly why. I've been to that place too. That dark place. I shied away from that thought. Of the self-poisonous air I'd been breathing in space. Of my slowly drifting away. Does Mom know about you? Yes. It's why I fell in love with her. A villain of all people. Unlikely, right? So many people think I defeated her in our last battle in Chicago, before she came to our side. And a whole lot of people think I somehow managed to reform her. He ran a hand through his hair, wiping sweat on his costume sleeve. It didn't do much good. The fabric was water-resistant, and the moisture just rolled off. He made a noise of disgust. I didn't reform her. His voice was shakier than I'd ever heard it. She saved me. She saw what I was doing in fighting her. She knew she outclassed me. She knew she could shut me down for good if she wanted to, and she saw that I wanted her to. Your mother talked me off the ledge. She refused to fight me. She let me take her in. And she demanded to stay with me, said she was ready to come over to our side, because she didn't want to let me out of her sight. Because villains get pain. Sometimes the heroes, we do our best, but we don't always understand those who live on the fringes. We don't understand why they do what they do. But villains are the ones who never fit anywhere, and fight to carve a place for themselves in the world. Who sometimes just try to make a better world for themselves. He sat back, looking exhausted. And heroes make a better world for themselves, and for others. Your mother did, for me. We sat in the quiet, the whine of the plane's electronics in standby. Finally I asked, Dad? Is it still okay if I go to Belize? With Benedita? He gave me a weird look. Like he'd been expecting something else. More questions maybe, or maybe just not a normal question. Like he'd been expecting me to look at him differently, like a stranger. But how could I? He was still Dad. Do you want to? He asked. I'm not sending you away. I just thought, it might be nice to have a break. I tilted my head back, looking up at the sky through the clear canopy. A sky I'd shot up into not long ago. A sky I'd come down from again. A blue summer day. I did have questions. So many questions, like was I a shapeshifter too? And what did that half of me actually look like? And what did that mean that both my sister and I looked totally human? I bit my lip. Do you ever wish you could change back? I asked. I mean, to being an alien. Looking like an alien, your own species. Does it bother you that you have to look human? That everyone expects you to? His brows furrowed. Then furrowed deeper. I can change back any time. I learned a long time ago that I can control a shift with effort if I want to. I studied his face, its familiar lines. So famously handsome. Unnaturally handsome. Have you ever tried? Do you know what you look like? I stopped. Do you like being human, or am I just afraid of what this world would think if I showed them who I really was? He sighed. Maybe that was the question he'd been expecting. A bit of both, he said. This is my home, and you, all of you, are my family. You, your sister, your mom, I love you all so much. And you think we wouldn't love you if we saw you or something? Dad's face crinkled. Oh, honey. This is who I really am. It doesn't matter what I look like, not really. This is what matters. He tapped his heart. My dad was so earnest. And he was convincing. But I saw the heat rising up with the chill in his heart. The pain and the need for more masks than one. And I understood. I understood why he might have seen the signs of who I was when I was younger, that I was never going to be normal even by hero standards, and hadn't let himself see them. He had his own scars, his own pains and fears. But this wasn't my father's story. This was mine. And I couldn't unpack everything just then. Not with everything else crowding my head. So I said, I love you, Dad. Thanks for bringing me back. I kissed him on the cheek, and that seemed to be what he needed. Then I opened the canopy and shot up into the sky, this time aiming south. 6. The first thing Benedita did when I landed in front of her slightly run-down hotel complex in balmy coastal Belize City was enfold me in a huge, feathery hug. If my dad's hugs were still the best hugs, Benedita's were a close second. She'd been one of the first to fully welcome me into the heroing community when I'd gained my powers. I'd taken to her no-nonsense brusqueness immediately, and she'd been like an aunt to me ever since. I didn't see her more than once or twice a year, but I fiercely looked forward to those times, even to those crises which brought on a global team-up. My dad knew that. He did pay attention in some ways. Maybe in more ways than I'd thought. The second thing Benedita did was hand me a bundle of blue and gray fabric with a blue half-face mask on top. Can you fight? I just got a call about another outbreak of nanites in Corazal, up north. Local heroes have the worst of it covered, but need help with the overspill. Change in 2 minutes and we can fly up there. I looked at the rumpled, generic hero costume. Then down at the black and gold magnificent costume I still wore. I closed my eyes in a moment of deepest relief. Here, I wouldn't have to be magnificent person. I could be just another hero in the fight, and whatever I did here would have nothing to do with my name or gender or family. From someone else, this generic costume might have been an insult, a way of saying that she didn't want to work with me, with magnificent person as I was. But from Benedita? I knew she understood. The weight of my family name slipped off my shoulders, and the possibility of an anonymity I'd never known as a hero drifted into its place. Thank you, I whispered, and darted into the hotel to find a bathroom. The lobby bathroom was, mercifully, one unisex room. I wouldn't have to deal with people eyeing me and wondering if I should be in there, in either choice I usually had. Never mind the costume, people still judged. Or maybe they judged more because of the costume. Family values to uphold and all that, as if family automatically meant not queer. A lump rose in my throat, but I swallowed it down, changing quickly, and when I emerged, I wasn't magnificent person. Benedita opened her hooked beak in a grin, and stuffed my magnificent costume into her backpack before flapping up into the sky. That day, I fought beside her. I'd never fought alone with her before, always being preoccupied with my family's coordination. And I thought my dad's mastery of the air was complete, and my own abilities to manipulate EM fields pretty good, but this was Benedita's element. She owned the air, diving down through houses and palm trees and slashing like a great black raptor at the twisted, super-strong creatures the nanites had turned ordinary people into. But she never hurt them more than she needed to stop them from hurting others. And afterward, after she injected the antidote and treated their wounds, she stayed with them while they sweated out the nanite infection, holding them down as their bodies bent back into their own shapes, speaking softly while they screamed. Dad and Mom and my sister and I, we'd always pommeled our problems. We'd never stayed around for the aftermath or tried to clean things up. Had we thought we were above that? I joined Benedita, kneeling on the fight-cracked pavement, speaking softly in English. A lot of the people spoke it, but for those who didn't, I only had my smattering of high school Spanish and didn't want to make a mistake. Not here and now. But I watched Benedita and knew it was the softness in my voice that calmed the victims, not the words. This kind of hero work was new to me. It was something new to bring people back and not just beat them down. Not leave the aftermath, the harder part I found that day, to others. I found myself sitting on the ground with a girl about my age, holding her tightly as she screamed and writhed, her body snapping painfully back into its original shape. Holding her while she leaned her forehead, exhausted, on my shoulder and sobbed. As she clung to me, fingers digging into my back, shivering with fever or fear or aftershock, I felt the coldness inside her. The absolute zero of her terror. I took some of my own heat and gave it to her. And she calmed. Giving my heat had been instinctual. The girl's abrupt calm rattled me enough that I pushed back, stood up, shot into the air to get enough distance to look at the small battle that had raged through a usually calm neighborhood. One house was still on fire, though a local hero was funneling seawater to put it out. Fire sirens blared, the fire department was on its way. The damage to people and homes would have continued to spread, infecting more people, and causing more pain and destruction on a greater and greater scale if us heroes hadn't been here with the antidote to the nanite incursion plague to stop it. To fight the fires. To calm the people. I'd fought victims of the nanites before. Fought those people who happened to be near an incursion rift when it opened or got too close to someone who had. Fought alongside my family. But then, always then, I'd been so focused on not doing anything wrong. On not giving anyone watching a chance to ridicule me, and there was always someone watching, with cameras, with things to say later, in the papers, in the magazines, and online. But I wasn't magnificent person here, I had to keep telling myself that. No one knew who I was, other than that I was with Benedita, whom they loved. She was one of the few heroes who'd stationed themselves in Belize, when everyone else had gone to the major cities to fight the greater incursions there. Or reap the greater glory. Benedita was needed in her native Rio de Janeiro, but she'd chosen to come here. And so had I. Floating above the scene, I drew in a deep breath and decided I hadn't done anything wrong. I'd helped that girl in my own way. I'd given her calm. I slowly came back down, noting Benedita with a woman in a medic's uniform and a man who was just shivering out the last of the infection. "You're doing good, kid," she called, then waved as a crash sounded to my left. A man we'd missed whose nanite-twisted body was driving him to take a sledgehammer to a car. Maybe his own. Maybe not. He was close enough that I formed a force field bubble around him so he couldn't hurt anything, then lifted him just enough off the ground to float him over to us. I reached for one of the antidote injectors Benedita had given me for my belt. I was out, so I turned toward her open backpack a few feet away. "Careful," Benedita called. "He's going to hurt himself." I whipped back around to see the infected man shifting to turn the hammer on himself. "No." I reached out and without thinking stole the heat from his heart. He crumpled, slumping against the borders of my electrostatic bubble. "Kid, what did you do?" Benedita squawked, pushing up as I set the bubble back on the ground and released it. She rushed over to the infected man and checked his neck, then injected him with the antidote. She held him as he started to tremble, his body purging the infection. I took a step back, away from Benedita's stare in the harsh afternoon sunlight, the air drifting with flecks of ash. Was she angry? Did she know what I'd done? What I tried so hard not to do when I was in the field with my parents, wondering if my mom or sister would sense that I'd just stolen someone's heat. But sometimes, when I was caught off guard, it just happened. Sometimes it was my body's first reaction to a situation rather than the last resort, no matter how much I tried to train the impulse out of myself. I hadn't killed anyone yet, but I'd probably been close. My parents might write off a weird takedown to my control over EM fields. My dad could pinch pressure points or cut off someone's air from a football field away. He could even stop a heart. But Benedita knew somehow that what I'd just done wasn't like that. Maybe she'd fought enough times alongside Dad. Or maybe it had been something in the way I'd moved. Or something her enhanced spectrum eyes could see that I couldn't. I saw it in her cocked head. The way she kept touching the man's neck, as if his pulse might stop at any moment, and was reluctant to let the medics take over. Like she was on totally new ground. The way she kept looking back at me. Suspicious? Afraid? The people gathered around us cheered at another foe defeated, another victim brought back from the brink. They cheered because they didn't know me, and didn't know what I'd just done, and what I could do if I wanted to. What I wanted to do, every time people came to a fight and held up protest signs saying I was going to hell. Yelling slurs at me and saying I should just die. Heat boiled inside me, burning like a fever. Sometimes, so many times, I wanted to reach into all that simmering heat of hate around me and snuff it out. Rip it all away, all of it. From all of their hearts. Maybe that was part of why I'd gone into space. Because I couldn't steal the heat where there was no heat to steal. I needed to protect the world from me. Because I didn't know how much more of any of this I could take without killing great handfuls of bigots. But I saw no bigots here and now. I mostly felt cooling fear and some despair, and the warmth of gratitude in the hearts around me. I wrapped my arms around myself, starting to shake. There was another crash, a scream down the street. I didn't have time to process now. There was never time to think about anything but the job when I was on the job. I broke Benedita's gaze and shot off in the direction of the scream. No matter if I was really a monster inside, and no matter if Benedita now knew it, there were still people who needed my help. 7. We sat in Benedita's stuffy hotel room, with its walls that probably used to be blue and its creaky, sagging beds, because yet again, you could save the world every day, but no one paid you to do it. Benedita might have been able to afford a better place to stay, if she let herself be hired out as a mercenary, or accepted some of the offers to study her unique physiology. But she disdained all of them. I'd even seen her turn down a charity work grant from one of the wealthier heroes. She'd said she needed to keep her own life, thank you very much, and that her life didn't need more than her internet accounting business to function. When another hero offered her a mobile satellite connection for internet access everywhere, she'd said she could just fly to the nearest city when she wasn't home in Rio, thank you very much. I sat across from Benedita, one person I respected more than anyone else on the planet. What had happened earlier in the nanite incursion hung between us. We'd said nothing on the flight back to the hotel, not that flying faster than a walk was conducive to more than shouted one-syllable words, and I'd avoided meeting her eyes as she got out 2 leftover cheese sandwiches from a cooler and handed one to me. I hadn't wanted to eat, but I was always starved after a fight. And I had to be ready for the next fight too, because a hero never knew when they'd be needed. Or maybe there wouldn't be a next fight. Not for me. I gulped a bit of my sandwich. Benedita ate her own sandwich in silence, giving me time. It was worse than a lecture or an outburst, and my stomach knotted around my food. The heroes considered her one of their best interrogators, not because she was brutal but because she waited, and when the other person was ready to talk, she listened. I had to tell her everything. I had to tell someone, because my eyes burned again and my chest tightened until it hurt to breathe. I was so tired of carrying all this alone. Maybe I could tell her everything. Of all the people in my life, she was the only person who'd ever slowed down enough to listen. I discarded my sandwich and dropped my gaze to my lap. I was still dressed in my borrowed, dirt and soot-streaked hero costume, and stinking like I hadn't put on deodorant in a week. I told Benedita about shooting up into space. About not quite taking enough air. Then it all rushed out. I told her why I'd wanted to go up there, to get away from everyone shouting at me. I didn't really know who I was yet, but I couldn't be what the world wanted me to be. I couldn't be a girl. I wasn't a girl. I told her I stole heat from people and lit their hearts on fire, a power I'd never told my parents about. And I did it without thinking sometimes. I'd gone up into space partly because I was scared I'd steal heat from the people who hated me, steal all their heat and know fully what I was doing this time. I told her what had happened when I first got my powers in the girls' bathroom. It was the first time I'd told anyone. I could have killed them, I said, my voice hoarse. I squeezed my hands tightly and didn't look up at Benedita perched on the other bed. I couldn't face her disappointment or her contempt. Benedita clicked her beak and shuffled her wings. But you didn't kill them, did you? You'd be a very different person right now, if you had. Practical, no-nonsense Benedita. Delivered in an accent that was growing thicker with her native Portuguese, in her own fatigue. She didn't get it. Couldn't she see that I was bad? I balled my hands into fists. I wanted to kill them. I still want to, every time anyone says, I snapped my mouth shut. Closed my eyes against the world, the protesters, the shouting angry masses. Boiling hot tears streamed down my cheeks. I'm a monster, I whispered. I'd never said it out loud. And now, hearing the words come out of my mouth, I sagged. It was true. I'd known it for years, but was finally admitting it. I wouldn't have to pretend anymore. I wouldn't have to try to be the hero, and hope no one saw the taint that lay beneath the mask. My mom, I sniffed and swiped at my eyes. The news. They say I'm like my mom. I'm a villain at heart. And yeah, I know everyone thinks she's reformed, but she hasn't really. Even Dad said she hasn't, and I don't think she will. She just doesn't get being a good person. She can play at being a hero and do good things and keep herself from killing people, but that's not what she'd do without us. I thought about what Dad had told me, that she'd saved him from himself. She loved him. She loved us kids. She could be good, really good. She'd helped me sew a new costume and she was trying to use my pronouns, though I had to correct her almost every time and watch her cringe at what she thought was bad grammar. But she was trying. If she did all that, did it balance out her careless attitude toward killing? Dad could get her to stop killing, but he couldn't make her feel remorse when she slipped up. I think I'm bad. I think I'm broken. And not because I'm genderqueer or part alien or anything like that, my voice broke, my chest knotting with pain. I couldn't say the next words. Just couldn't say that I thought I shouldn't be a hero anymore. Even if I stole heat, even if I wanted to steal the heat of everyone around me, even if it got that bad. I knew I couldn't let that happen. What if putting away my costume and mask right now was the right thing to do? But the thought of not doing what I loved best in the world took my breath from me. Kid, Benedita said. Oh kid. Have I ever told you about where I came from and how I got out of there? I hugged myself tightly. She told me the basics, and what did that have to do with what I just said? It felt like a weird echo of my conversation with Dad. Secrets that were relevant and shattering and would make me feel different about everything. I scooted back on the bed and drew my knees up to wrap my arms around them. The room was getting dark, the single window showing the last edge of sunset. I reached to the table between the beds and flicked on the lamp. Yes, a lot of times, I said. Well, you got the abridged version. She clucked a bitter chuckle and shifted across the few feet between us to settle beside me. I tried not to flinch. She shouldn't want to sit near me. But she didn't budge. I was born in the worst kind of eugenics lab, where no one cared if I was a person as long as they made their progress quotas, ticked off their research boxes, got their tissue samples. I was a step in their goal to create an ultimate fighter, a most efficient, intelligent weapon. She clicked her beak in disgust. Yes, and you got out, I said. Yes, and I got out, she agreed. I got out by killing the lab worker who brought me my food. And slashing my way through the detention wing. And I didn't leave when I could have, no. I tracked down the people who cut into my flesh when they wanted to try something new. Who looked me in the eye and asked me to do simple tasks, training me like an animal, not a person, even though they knew I was as smarter than them. They watched while I writhed in pain and made their damn lab notes. So I found them in each of their offices, and I watched them writhe in pain too. I killed them. She flexed her long, razor-sharp talons. I didn't know morality then. Who could have taught me? Or maybe I did. I knew what they were doing was wrong. I don't regret what I did to them when I left, or that I stopped them from hurting more people like me, making more people like me. I don't regret a moment of it. So tell me, kid, does that make me a monster? I looked up in the orange lamplight and met her large dark eyes. Could I see her as anyone other than the Benedita I knew and loved? She was fierce, yes. She was a fighter. But could I see her as this brutal killer she described? My mind rebelled against it. I fight my instincts every day, she said. I was programmed to kill. It's in my genes to have no mercy. If I'd been the pinnacle in their forced evolution, I would be a full-on psychopath, not caring about the carnage. But I do care. I care enough to hold myself together. To train my habits so I can use my skills to help the world, not hurt it. And when we come up against the kind of people who made me, and there are a shocking lot of people who care only for the end result of their work and screw the cost, do you think I don't want to step in there and kill every one of them again? Stop them all, and never let any of that happen again? To someone else or to me? I stared at her, my eyes growing wide. Yes, Benedita was ruthlessly efficient in a fight. That was part of what made her a valuable and sought-after hero. But she was one of the kindest people I knew. Gruff in her way but kind. She never killed unless there was no other choice. And I'd watched her earlier, holding the nanite victims like they were her own children. Her personal responsibility. I swallowed hard. Was she a monster? And if she was, did that mean there was hope for monsters? Benedita patted my knee. Do you think you're evil because you've thought of hurting your abusers? But I have hurt them, I said, kicking at the worn brown carpet. Yes. On instinct and without training. But you haven't killed anyone with this heat-stealing ability, have you? No. I don't think so. And have you helped anyone? I thought about the girl I'd held earlier in the streets of Corazal, how I'd given her some of my heat. How she'd gone from hysterical to unnaturally calm. Benedita nodded. I watched you take off earlier like something spooked you, and the victims don't usually calm down on their own, not that fast. I've been thinking about that. So you have some control, and you have a desire not to kill. If you wanted to kill everyone you'd ever stolen heat from, truly wanted to kill them, they would be dead, and you'd feel no remorse. You wouldn't want to keep the world safe. You just wouldn't care. Truly, kid, we wouldn't be having this conversation because you wouldn't be a hero. But you are. I know you didn't set out to calm that kid earlier, but you did. And that was good. I squeezed my hand so hard my knuckles cracked. Benedita nudged me with one shoulder. Do you know how many heroes are born out of tragedy and rise above it? And on the flip side, how many people want to hurt the people who've hurt them? And how many do, if given the chance? Yes, I'd fought villains. I'd fought so many people who thought having power meant destroying things. Destroying people and hope. Benedita bobbed her head down so she could look at me, catch my gaze again. That's not you. You never have and likely never will do that. Not on purpose, I know you. I've seen monsters and you are not a monster. I drew in a long breath and my shoulders heaved on the exhale and didn't stop. Now that's not to say you don't need training. But the sobs came like the fallout of a war. I tried to stop them, but gave up when Benedita gathered me against her, pressing my head into the slick feathers of her chest, clucking softly. I cried until I had no more air. Cried out years' worth of fear and shame, and I still wasn't sure I believed her that I wasn't a monster. But maybe I didn't have to decide that right now. Benedita was here, and I knew she'd keep me from hurting anyone. I wouldn't hurt anyone when she was around. When I was spent and still shaking, she laid me down in the bed and tucked me in, like my parents never had. Sleep, she said. We'll start your training with these different powers in the morning. I sat back up, panic prickling sweat on my forehead. Benedita, please. Don't tell my parents about what I said. I mean what I can do and all of it. Please. Her beak lulled open in a smile. Kid, we all have stories to tell. But that one's not mine. 8. That whole next week, Benedita tried to teach me meditation, saying it was good for control no matter what your powers were, and since we didn't really know how my powers worked, we should start there. And it did help calm me. But there were more nanite incursions we had to deal with in the meantime, and twice more I used my powers accidentally in the field. Once to steal a nanite-infected woman's heat while she was chasing a group of teenagers with a kitchen knife, and once to calm one of those teenagers when I learned the infected woman was his mom. I gave him my own heat, but when I realized what I was doing midstream, I tried to use Benedita's meditation techniques in the moment to control the flow. Instead of calming him, I ended up putting the boy to sleep. Benedita saw it happen and checked the boy out to make sure he was okay. You're doing good, kid, she said to me. Carry on. That stoked a fire in my gut. I was doing good? I'd accidentally put that boy to sleep. And what if I'd done more? What if my trying to control my powers made things worse? The smoldering heat of my anger burned all day and into the evening, while Benedita led me through standing yoga poses outside our hotel's small pool. Water reflections danced across her black feathers in iridescent waves. She looked impossibly graceful, impossibly serene. Did she seriously not care that I might have killed someone earlier? I dropped my arms, breaking the latest pose. It's not working, Benedita. Nothing's working. I can't help what I'm doing, and today, you saw what happened. I shouldn't be out there. You just need practice, Benedita said calmly. Actual practice. I thought we could start with the mind, but your responses are more ingrained than I thought. You need to learn everything about what triggers your powers and what those triggers feel like, and what your powers feel like when you're trying to use them too. You're not going to learn that in the field when your attention is on everything else. I scuffed at the concrete with one of my sneakers. I hadn't brought anything other than my magnificent costume to Belize City, but Benedita had picked up a pair of running shoes in my size. And the brand I like too. So what? How do I practice? How do I know my triggers unless I'm triggered? You want me to go find a bunch of angry people, and then what? Make them all pass out and see how it feels? Ha! I know a few bars that might pay you for that service. Her beak lolled open in a smile as she shifted to another pose. No, kid. I want you to practice on me. My stomach wrenched. What? No. I grabbed the back of a lounge chair to steady myself. Practice on her? What if I hurt her? What if she wanted to push me, and Benedita was very good at pushing people in their buttons, and I did more than hurt her. What if I actually killed her? Like those girls in the school bathroom. Like I'd almost done to them. Accidentally or not. I backed away toward the hotel. No, I said. You can't practice on non-consenting people. So that leaves animals, plants, and rocks. I don't think rocks will do much good. Or plants, and I'm not letting you practice on animals who can't consent either. You need people who feel and know what they're getting into. I feel a lot of things, and I volunteer. You won't hurt me, kid, I trust you. Trust me that I trust you, okay? I swallowed, shuddering in the humid breeze. Benedita refused to believe that any of my powers were inherently bad. She was wrong. What happened earlier had proven again she was wrong, but I loved her too much to say it. Or maybe I was just scared. Scared of this. Scared of everything I felt when I stole or gave heat. I'd felt a rush earlier when I'd known I could help that boy, before I'd gone too far and put his life in danger. A rush of power. I'd had the power to help him or not help him. And I'd liked that feeling. I knew from fighting too many villains that liking any kind of dangerous power was a recipe for bad things to happen. I'm just a bomb waiting to go off, you know that? Benedita rolled her shoulders, neck feathers standing on end. I won't say your powers aren't dangerous, kid. A lot of us have dangerous powers, and we have to learn to live with them and control them. I'm not too happy that we haven't made progress yet. I'll even say I'm not happy our attempts at learning control backfired today. We need to do better, because I need you in the field. Everyone else is still tied up with the big incursion points in the big cities. So can you feel that? Feel the heat of my annoyance? And the cold of my fear? I'm afraid, kid. Can you feel that? I hugged my arms around myself. That I'll kill someone? Can't say I'm not a little afraid of that. But you haven't so far, and you've had these powers for years, so I don't think you will. No, kid. I'm afraid you'll give up and believe what the media wants you to believe. What you've told yourself for years and not realize just how amazing you are. I'm damn scared you'll decide you don't deserve this gift, this power to calm anyone in a crisis. It wasn't a gift. How could she possibly think this was a gift? But she was right that I had to gain control somehow. Even if I stopped going out in the field, I couldn't stop being me. I couldn't not be genderqueer, and I knew some people would always look at me with the fire of hate in their hearts. I knew I'd still be vulnerable to attacks, even if I wasn't in costume or advertising I was ready for a fight. I'd still be the subject of protests, even if those protests were one person yelling insults while I crossed the street. I yelled my frustration and reached for Benedita's heat. She was baiting me, of course. I knew her ways, and she wasn't even being subtle about it. Her emotions were a mix of heat and cold, as she'd said. But neither element was as strong as she'd played them up to be. She wanted me to practice on her? Would a demonstration of what this felt like on the end of my victims be enough to make her give up training me? Half of me wanted that to happen. For her to say I was too dangerous to be in the world at all, that I needed to be locked in the detention cells where the heroes kept the most dangerous people, criminals or otherwise. The other half of me didn't dare hope I might actually be trainable. I reached inside myself, grabbed the heat of my anger and shoved it at her. Oh, Benedita said, and flapped her wings twice before alighting back on the ground. Well? You gave me some of your cold too. I'm significantly more afraid now. Did you know you could give fear as well as anger or calm? I choked and checked the mix of temperatures inside her heart and inside mine. I was less afraid. She was definitely more, edging on panic. She shifted into another yoga pose, trying for calm. I'm sorry, Benedita, I'm sorry, I panicked and tried to give her more heat. She bared her taloned fingers. Too much. Too much heat. Shit, I whispered, covering my mouth with both hands. backing away again. "No, kid," she said, voice strained with tension. "You're doing good. Focus on what you feel when you take away my heat this time." "You want me to do it again?" She held up both hands. "We'll get through this. You're worth it, kid. Do you believe that? Because if you don't believe that, this isn't going to work either, and I really want it to work. What do you say, kid?" I bit my lip and slowly nodded. 9. We practiced every day, every time we had downtime. The first few days, it was torture. The more attuned to the internal temperatures of emotions I got, the more I saw how much our training took a toll on Benedita. After an hour, she'd be emotionally numb, and when we went inside, she'd need a nap. But she didn't stop. She refused to stop, no matter how much I pleaded. "You're worth it, kid, you really are. You might not think so yet, but I do. And I'm just catching up on sleep." I bit my lip, tears hovering in my eyes, until she relented and came closer to me, feet talons scuffing the poolside concrete. "Oh, kid. You're not hurting me more than a good sparring session. And I want you to live in this world without fear of your power. There's nothing worse than to fear your own power. So let's go another round, okay?" Slowly, I gained more control. I learned not just to push or pull the heat from Benedita, but to slowly warm her. Or cool her until she wasn't afraid, but had enough sense not to charge off into danger. Fear was a useful emotion, we found, when Benedita got overdrunk on her lack of it and tried to go confront a local bureaucrat who'd been giving us trouble with the nanite situation. That time, I pulled enough heat from her to put her to sleep. And she wasn't even too mad at me when she woke up a few minutes later. She said it saved her a few weeks of making it up to the sleazeball. I still went out in the field. I had to, I was needed. While the nanite crisis was winding down around the world, Belize still had an active incursion nexus, and the nanites here were just enough nuisance to need more than a few heroes on the job. I gained control in the field too. In one particularly bad incursion, a group of infected people turned into a mob out to tear down a resort. I was able to calm them, get them to stand still while we injected them one by one with the antidote. And I warmed the hearts of those watching in fear, until the whole scene became serene. We did get paid that time, paid in a hotel suite with a gorgeous view of the water. Benedita, saint that she was, turned it down. She taught me not to push emotions too far, or beyond where a person would want to go themselves. And never to let my own pain tempt me to use my powers to hurt someone. Benedita knew about pain and the temptation to use it. Because sometimes we want to hurt people to release some of our pain, she said. But that only hurts us more in the end, doesn't it? And then, when I had enough control of my heat and cold powers to use them comfortably, she said, "I want you to stop using your new powers for a week. Suppress your instincts. Don't even use them a little bit." What? But I'm helping people. We just landed after an incursion fight around a local grocery store. Only one victim this time, thank God, though we'd stayed to inoculate everyone in the store, and were headed toward our hotel room. "You're the one who told me my powers could be used for good, and I'm using them for good, right?" I'd been starting to reach out to the ordinary people around me, soothe a bit of anxiety here, boost some confidence there. That was good, wasn't it? It felt good to be using my powers for good. And yeah, I did still have that bit of a power rush, but it was starting to be not that different than when I rescued people with my EM fields. It was just helping people, right? Helping them have a better day. No, kid. These powers should be a last resort, and you have to ask permission unless someone is in mortal danger or putting someone else in danger. People need to work through their own shit. It would be tempting. Oh God, it was tempting, thinking of how I could tone down the heat of a mob of protesters or any transphobic people I had to deal with. Wouldn't that make the world a better place? It would certainly make me feel better. Would you want someone taking away your pain or anger without permission? No. Calm them if there's a crisis and there are lives, theirs or yours or others, in danger. Then leave them be. That's the hardest lesson of hero work, kid. We have all these powers, but we can't change the world by forcing them to do what we want, no matter how much we think it would make the world better. Believe me, I know. I can't tell you how many barely legal corporate labs I've wanted to shut down, but that wouldn't change those people's minds. It would only stoke up their passion for their work, and their dismissal of anyone born in a lab. We have to let them learn on their own. It's the only way for change to last. We reached the room and I collapsed onto my creaky bed, Benedita sitting on hers. It had been over a month since I'd come to Belize and its different rhythms of life. Since I'd confessed to Benedita my greatest secret, and she hadn't rejected me, she'd trained me. She'd given me more than I would ever have asked, using herself as a training subject to teach me to use my other hated powers. Maybe not so hated anymore. And she used my pronouns. We had a few hiccups here or there, but she mostly got it right. I could tell it was almost without thinking now. She used my pronouns. That was everything. I chewed my lower lip, studying my hands. Benedita? All of this, having powers you're afraid of, feeling alone, feeling like you're wrong somehow, this is what a lot of heroes deal with, isn't it? I finished in a whisper. Because I hadn't seen it before. As a kid, I'd seen my dad and mom and sister on TV, in the spotlight. All smiles for the cameras. And too exhausted when they came home to do more than say a tired hello. And sometimes not even that. I'd idolized them, well, my parents, maybe not my sister, though I'd been blazingly jealous. I saw the costumes. The whole world saw the costumes, the masks, but they didn't see the people underneath them, the heroes who were so scared they'd screw up. And maybe scared of themselves, and what they might accidentally do with their powers if things went wrong. And maybe scared that one day, they wouldn't be enough to save someone, or save a city, or save the world. I'm just a person, I said. And I'm just a person. We're all just people, doing our best to make some kind of peace in this world. Which sounds almighty and philosophical, but really it's just life. I nodded and kept thinking about masks, and how I wasn't sure I wanted to wear one anymore. Benedita didn't. She was too distinctive, anyway. And I was distinctive too. I'd started wearing a binder Benedita had made for me a week ago, and it felt good. So much better, when I looked at myself in the mirror, and could actually stand to look for more than a few moments of necessity. Better than the costume Dad had helped me sew, that to emphasize but didn't change my body. Much better than the generic costume I'd been wearing the last month, which had started to make me more dysphoric the more I wore it. Even though it was neutral, it didn't hide the curves I didn't want. But not having a typical hero physique would make me stand out more, not less, and I wasn't willing to only be myself part of the time. I wasn't sure I wouldn't want to make more physical changes in the future too. I would never blend in. I didn't know any other genderqueer heroes, but maybe they were out there. Maybe they thought they needed to wear masks too, masks that stayed on whether they were in costume or not. And I didn't want that. I reached absently to scratch my back beneath my t-shirt, working my fingers up underneath the tight binder where my back had begun to itch the last few days. Right in that place where you can barely reach no matter how hard you try. Heat rash, I told myself. But as my fingers brushed the skin, the rash felt more like lumps. Fist-sized lumps. One beside each shoulder blade. And the skin felt different. Flaky. As I poked at it, a chill going down my spine, it felt slick and cool. And then, the skin extended outward. I could feel it, both under my fingers and in bones that shouldn't be there, like two brand new limbs trying to unfold. I shot up off the bed, yanking up my shirt to expose my back, then scrabbling to pull up the binder too. Benedita. What's on my back? Benedita leaned down, inspecting the itchy patches. I panted, breaking into a cold sweat as I felt the gentlest, feathered touch on my back. Oh God. Oh God. I wasn't infected by the nanites, was I? But I didn't feel out of my mind. And I hadn't been affected before, so I thought my unique physiology made me immune. A few heroes had gone down with the plague before, and had to be fought down to be inoculated, and that had definitely not been fun. More than a few neighborhoods had been destroyed in those battles. It was a big reason why all the heavy hitters were still hovering around the cities, even though smaller incursion sites like ours were more active at the moment. All of this went through my head, along with the growing chant of "You're a monster, you're a monster, you're a monster." Benedita. She made a clucking sound. You said your father said your people were shapeshifters? What has that got to do with, Benedita, what's on my back? I rushed to the bathroom and banged open the door to twist around and peer at my back in the large mirror. I stopped dead still, staring at two black scaled nubs protruding from beside my shoulder blades. As I watched and felt it, I stretched those nubs into delicately boned, "What the fuck?" I yelled. Kid, Benedita said from the doorway, I think you're growing wings. 10. I freaked the hell out. Wings? What do you mean? I mean, they can't be. I pressed my hands against my chest. The binder had hitched in a tight bunch in the front. I couldn't breathe. Benedita squeezed into the tiny room with me. Here, kid, let me help. I swatted her away and turned my back, shaking out of my t-shirt and yanking the binding tank off. It took 3 tugs to get it over my head, before I threw my shirt back on again. I gripped the edge of the sink, gasping, trying not to feel the really weird new limbs feeling coming from my back. Well, it's not the nanite plague, Benedita said. You're in your right mind, aren't you? Yes. I craned to get a better look at my back. But wings? Didn't you tell me your father's species adapts to their environment? You've been living with me the last few weeks. You've never lived with anyone else but your family before, have you? So maybe this is your way of adapting? I shook my head, trying to hold up my shirt with one hand and feel at my back with the other. But it's not feathers. It's scaly like, I shivered. Like snakeskin. Oh, this is so gross. I reached for where my binder had fallen to the tiled floor. Maybe leave the binder off a few days. The skin is tender, yes? The wings might grow larger, and if? I need my binder, I snapped. I pulled it back on, over top of my shirt this time. Maybe that would help with the itching, I didn't know. I couldn't think much past the panic. It felt more than tight this time, because there was an extra few inches of wings on my back that hadn't been there before. And I winced as new fingers of pain shot up my back at the pressure, though it settled into a dull ache. But I needed to be able to look at myself and see me. I needed that, more than I needed my back not to itch or these wing things not to hurt. Maybe the binder would crush them down, make them go away. We should call your dad, Benedita said quietly. I have the secure comm. No. I hadn't talked to my dad or anyone in my family since I'd come to Belize. It wasn't that I was mad at them. Well, maybe a little. But they were the life I'd needed to get away from. And my life here, my new powers, was something I wasn't sure of yet. I didn't want to pull those worlds back together, not yet. Benedita hesitated, studying me. Then she snapped her beak in a sharp click. Let's just watch then. We'll watch it a few days, and if it gets really strange, I know all the good doctors. You think snake wings on my back aren't really strange? If it starts sprouting eyeballs or something. I screamed. Calm down, kid. Calm down. I'm joking, okay, it was a bad joke, I'm sorry. She raised her head and yelled something about the television, probably to stave off any complaints from the neighbors. A thump on the wall came back. I shifted my binder uncomfortably, trying to breathe through the panicky tightness in my chest, but I wouldn't take it off again. So I stalked out to the main room to hunt for another t-shirt to wear over top. Kid, we'll just watch it, okay? It'll be okay. Benedita sounded sure of herself, but I knew her well enough to hear when she was spouting her own bullshit, and there was a thread of icy fear in her heart. But she wasn't wrong. Over the next few days, when we weren't dealing with nanite incursions, we trained hard to keep my mind off the growing pressure on my back. The growing wings. We trained until Benedita and I were both exhausted, but it didn't stop me from rushing to the bathroom after every training session to check my back. The wings were bigger every time, and it got harder every time to put my binder back on, to flatten the growing wing nubs and their delicate bone structures to my back all day. On the fourth day, each wing was the size of one of my spread hands, and I had a gnawing feeling in my gut that they wouldn't stop there. On the fifth day, I realized that even though the wings were getting bigger, the binder wasn't getting tighter. Which was weird. Weird enough that I did a cursory check of my chest, too. I rushed out to Benedita, who was sitting exhausted on her bed, flicking through channels. "I'm changing," I said. I shook out my hands, which were tingling with nervous excitement. "Yeah, kid, I noticed that." "No, I mean my body, it's changing. On its own. Like my dad said, like what happened with him when he realized he was male and when he came here, so I don't think I need my binder anymore." Benedita focused on me, beak lolling open. "So this is definitely a shapeshifter thing." "Yeah? Which is awesome." I bounced on my toes. The thought of my flattening chest made me grin. "But I don't get the wings? They're not even like your wings. And why the weird scaly skin? It's so weird." Benedita sat forward, head cocked in her serious look. "Kid, don't take this the wrong way," and that was exactly the thing to pour water on my enthusiasm. Benedita was great, but she wasn't perfect. Could it be like what you said before? I mean, you said that first night you thought you were a monster, which I think is 100% wrong, and you know that, but maybe you still think that? I swallowed and stopped bouncing. Was that what this was? My inner fears showing themselves in my body? Would I end up some hideous creature that made everyone run when they saw me? All the feelings of being small rushed back to me, and I hugged myself tightly, eyes on the ground. Didn't people want to run when they saw me anyway, as magnificent person? Or throw things at me? Or try to kill me? Was I growing snake wings so I could give them their wish, to show them they were right to be afraid? Kid, do you still think that? I shook myself. No. No, I had a handle on my powers now. I was still learning, but I had control. And I'd stopped using my heat and cold powers unless I absolutely needed to, as she'd asked as we were practicing. And when I did use them, I was helping people, not hurting them. I dug my nails into my palms. I was not, and never would be, a monster. Not because of being genderqueer. Or having dangerous powers. Or having snake wings. No. I don't believe that. I met her gaze. It was true, and a knot I hadn't realized was in my stomach eased. I wasn't a monster. And I wasn't turning into one. This was something else. But I don't know what's. I pressed my hands to my eyes. I was expecting soft skin, but I got sandpaper. Ow. I jerked my hands away to look at my palms. There was a tracery of flaking skin around the edges, and jet black, scaly skin poking out underneath. My heart sped up. It wasn't just the wings. But Dad said, he said his species changed to fit their image of who they were and to adapt to the people around them. I wasn't adapting to Benedita, or at least not just to her. Her feathers were black, but she didn't have scales. And the wings, I rushed back to the bathroom. I felt a burning in my back as I thought about the wings, about the way they were ribbed, almost like a bat's, or I'd been calling them snake wings. Snakes didn't have wings. But dragons did. I yanked up my shirt and saw the wings had grown out a few more inches, and were now lined in bright gold scales around the edges. What the hell? Black and gold, like the Magnificent's costumes. Like the hand-reworked football jersey my dad had on when he first shot up to save New York from the invading alien ships. That had D20 sewn onto the back. I sprinted back to the main room. I need to call Dad. Benedita handed me the phone-like communicator she used for official hero business. He's 1181. Like she'd known I would ask. Or maybe she'd just been waiting for me to ask these last few days. I punched in the numbers and barricaded myself back in the bathroom. Please wait while the connection is established, a computerized voice said in my ear. I didn't have to wait long. Hello? Dad said. Benedita? Dad? Oh. Honey, are you in trouble? Do you need me to come? Dad, no, so you love Dungeons and Dragons, right? I know we never played, but you talked about it, and I remember there were definitely dragons. It's called Dungeons and Dragons. Is that why you like to play? Because of the dragons. What? What's going on? Back up, start at the beginning. I could hear his panic warring with years of getting information from hysterical people. I almost laughed. This was all so weird. Too weird. It's all right, he said, going into calm superhero mode. Whatever this is. Just start at the beginning and we'll work through this. Dad, are we freaking dragons? I heard the faint whine of the connection. The soft hiss of his breathing. Do you want me to come? He asked. Because I can be there in 10 minutes if I push it. No. Dad. I just want to know. Our species. Your species. What do you actually look like? I heard him sigh and went on quickly. I'm sorry, what did you look like before you came here? And I know you don't like to talk about it. No. Well, and I've never told you, and you should know you're right. Yes, we share some reptilian traits with what you might call dragons. Our skin is natively fine scales. Black and gold. Another hesitation. Yes. My family group at least. And our extended relatives. Has someone contacted you? Honey, has anyone in my family contacted you? Have you seen anyone who looks like? No, Dad. I'm changing. Honey, I'll be there in 10 minutes. No. Please, Dad. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. At the scaled edges of my hands. And now that I looked closer, around my face as well. I poked at the black and gold scales lining my hairline. Had that just happened, or had Benedita seen and not told me? Wouldn't I have noticed, as obsessively as I'd checked the mirror these last few days? I stared at the scales, trying to fit what my dad described to me. To half of me. A reptilian species who shared traits with dragons. And it was half of me, wasn't it? The half my dad himself would never show the world. Because what would they think if they saw him like that? He wouldn't be the golden boy anymore. Are you sure you don't want me to come? He asked. Honey, you shouldn't be going through this alone. It might even be dangerous because you're half human. Dad, I'm with Benedita. It's okay. And anyhow, she knows doctors if I need them. Okay, but I can help you control it. You can change back to how you were. I looked at my nearly flat chest beneath my loose t-shirt. Not completely masculine. But not feminine anymore either. I felt my shoulders relax. Well, at least the mystery of why my dad's family could fly was solved. They could literally fly. With wings? I didn't know how large my wings would grow, but they couldn't be big enough to lift me without help. I had the EM fields for that. So apparently, did they. Physics. I snorted. Honey. Yeah, I'm okay, Dad. Thanks for telling me. Okay. Are you okay, though? Really okay? Because you can call me anytime, and I'll be there. Yeah. I'm really fine. I promise. And I gotta go, Dad. Talk to you later. I pushed the off key on the comm phone before he could ask me just how I was changing. Because I didn't know yet. Not fully. I drew my shirt up over my back again and flexed my newly growing wings. It was the first time I'd consciously tried to move them, and it felt like stretching my legs after sitting on them for a long time. After never having walked before. Black and gold. Freaking black and gold. We'd been wearing his, my family's, my other family's colors all along. Dad might have adapted to humanity, but he'd still taken a part of his family with him. His species. It had carried over. And I'd wanted to be myself, hadn't I? Fully myself. I was half freaking alien dragon. I laughed. I laughed until my stomach hurt, and Benedita shouldered her way into the bathroom, and then she held me until I'd cried it out and laughed again. And this time I felt so much lighter. 11. I wasn't a monster, and my body was done changing. I could feel that in the strength in my muscles, a settledness. The feeling of finally being at home in myself. I had something made for you, Benedita said one day in our room after a long day of training, but thankfully no fighting. The nanite incursions were tapering off. Heroes in other parts of the world had mounted expeditions to the dimension the nanites came from, and had been stopping them at the source. This particular crisis was almost over, thank goodness. I would never get used to ordinary people becoming monstrous. Or the toll it took on them. The trauma that might linger for weeks or years. Benedita was working with the local heroes to establish a non-profit in Belize, one of the most constant incursion points, to help the victims deal with the aftermath of what they had seen and experienced and done. But there were so many places around the world that had been affected by the nanite incursions. And healing wouldn't happen overnight. Benedita held out a brown paper-wrapped package to me. Yeah? What is it? I took it and turned it over in my hands. It felt both heavy and pliable. My brows shot up. I knew it would be a costume even before I peeled back the layers of paper. And I didn't know how I felt about that. Dad had always made my costumes, except the generic one I wore now, and here in this place outside my usual world and family that somehow didn't count. But I wasn't sure I was ready to give up that generic costume, despite having to cut slits in the back for my wings. I was hardly anonymous anymore, and local news had gone from showing me in the background as Benedita's sidekick to wondering who was this new potential major player. They hadn't figured out who I was. An unexpected 12-foot wingspan would do that. Even black-scaled dragon wings trimmed in gold. I opened the package up to scales. A fabric made of thousands of shimmering iridescent scales. It's hollow armor, Benedita said. I called in a favor and asked Heatherstorm to make one in your size. She's been experimenting with using them for infiltration herself. Heatherstorm, seriously? That must have been some favor. Heatherstorm was a tech billionaire vigilante from Japan, we thought, at least she often operated there, who was notoriously close with her identity and tech. Even Dad, near the top of the hero world, rarely got a hold of any of her gadgets. And this whole suit was from Heatherstorm? I bit my lip, more excited now, and unfolded the suit. It was in 4 pieces. A long-sleeve shirt, pants, and... Oh God, I said, realizing the 2 lighter, weirdly shaped pieces were for my wings. So the hollow armor, Benedita said, it's telepathic. Heatherstorm used some 12th dimensional tech in the design. Don't ask me how she got it or figured it out, that's beyond even me. She rustled her wings uncomfortably at that admission, then quickly went on, it knows what you want it to be. So if you're wearing the suit, you can change its colors and design. It's both chameleon wear and a holographic projector, and will project the image of any appearance around you that you wish within a certain distance tolerance, which is why you'd need to suit your wings. So you can be normal if you wish. For a little while. Or not. Or use it as your full costume. Wear it all the time. It's protective and does whatever you want. I crushed the scaly fabric in my hands, my throat tightening. I'd been with Benedita for 3 months, and in those months I'd grown wings. Black and gold scales lined the edges of my face, ran down my back in ridged patterns, rimmed the edges of my hands and fingers. I could fold my wings to my back, which lessened the stares, but didn't make them go away. I'd gotten used to sleeping on my stomach or side now. But the scales on my skin weren't easily covered with makeup. I tried, and then cried about it after because I didn't know if I wanted to cover them or not. Or if I should. When I looked in the mirror, sometimes I saw myself. And sometimes I saw so much more. A person expanded, without categories to tie them down. Someone I could hardly have imagined would look back at me in the mirror one day. Someone who might truly be a hero. Neither Benedita nor I had talked about what I'd do after I left. I would leave at some point, probably soon. The nanite incursion was winding down, and Benedita had her own life in Brazil to return to. I couldn't stay with her forever. I'd thrown myself into training and fighting and figuring out what I thought about myself and my powers and the person I was becoming. And that had all been good. Belize was good. But I had a different world to get back to. A faster, more brutal world to somehow find my place in. We hadn't talked about how different I looked from ordinary humans, either. Benedita had gone out of her way to let me know that whoever I was becoming was entirely ordinary in her eyes, and I loved her for that. But that wasn't what the world would do. Belize City was still mostly free of the news crews that plagued American heroes, and though the local stations took note of my appearance, with everything else going on in the world and the focus on major cities and their resident heroes as usual, coverage of me had yet to spread far. If I showed up in New York, how long would it be before people put together the black and gold of my wings with the black and gold of the magnificence? Had my dad been following what happened in Belize? Had he seen me on the news? Of course he had. He'd be watching all feeds out of Belize after I'd last talked to him, I knew it. But I hadn't called him since the day I'd asked about our species, and he hadn't called either. He was giving me space. Or maybe he was just busy. Probably busy, knowing Dad. I ran a hand over the slippery fabric, and a new thought made my stomach tighten. Hollow armor. I could be ordinary, if I wanted to. Did Benedita think I should hide who I was? Wasn't that the opposite of everything she'd shown me these last months? Hadn't she done everything to show me I wasn't a monster? But what if no one else saw who I saw in the mirror? What if the world could only see a monster, not a hero? There was a reason my dad remained blended in with humanity. Benedita turned off the TV, which had been playing a reality show in the background. Silence clogged the small room, the room that had felt like home to me until that moment. I watched a black feather fall from one of Benedita's wings and drift to the floor. My own scaled wings tightened with my growing anxiety. Kid, I know what you're thinking. And what this gift is, it's a choice. You can wear it however you want. You can make it look like your old magnificent costume, or imagine a new one, or give yourself scales all over, or turn yourself purple or rainbow or ultraviolet or whatever you want. Or you can cover your wings and scales if you need to. That suit can make you look fully human. Change your features. You can be whoever you want. But it's a choice. It's a choice I never had. I never got to have an ordinary life, and sometimes I wish I could. Wish I knew what it's like to be with someone, a woman or man who would see me as a person, not as. She waved a winged arm over her graceful and totally inhuman body. My eyes filled and I rushed at her, crushing her in my hug. Because she was Benedita, and she did get me, and because I realized she only had one card this big to call in with Heaterstorm. Like most scientifically minded heroes, Heaterstorm had always wanted to do a full scan of Benedita's physiology. It was the one thing I could think that would make Heatherstorm both build and part with a custom-made suit of her precious tech. The one thing Benedita always denied everyone, but her own rigorously chosen doctors. "I'm sorry," I cried, hugging her tighter. "I know what you did for this, and you shouldn't have." "I want you to be happy, kid," Benedita said, patting my back around my quivering wings. "Nothing else matters. You understand?" I opened and closed my mouth, eyes streaming before I finally got out, "Thank you. Thank you, Benedita." She made a please sound and crushed me back. "Of course, kid. That's what I'm here for." Benedita used to call me Sweet One when I was younger. But she hadn't called me that once in the last few months. She hadn't used my birth name either. Somehow, like all the other somehows, she'd known my birth name felt too raw for me to hear. And when we were with other people, any other people, she used my pronouns in public. My own family had trouble with that, selectively forgetting depending on who we were with and their personal politics. Or using my name instead of my pronouns, which was sometimes worse. An erasure. A wound. She treated me as an equal, and how she treated me hadn't changed through every change to my physical appearance. With her gift, she wasn't saying I should hide, but I didn't have to be anyone I wasn't ready to be. And I could be exactly who I was ready to be. I could also be safe when needed, if I needed to blend in. To step away. I didn't need to shoot into space, or come to Belize, or go anywhere else to be anonymous if the crowds and attention and haters were too much. Oh, Benedita. Who'd given the most sacred thing she could to let me have this hollow armor? This choice. I pulled back, clutching the suit tightly. Feeling so entirely full. She'd given me everything, and I wouldn't let her gift go to waste. 12. It was nearing dusk when I reached New York City. I tensed when I spotted my family from a distance, soaring easily over the skyscrapers. I wanted to talk to Dad, but I'd known they'd all be here. Of course, they were always together. And why did just seeing them make my insides tighten? I'd read about kids whose parents kicked them out for being gay or transgender, and mine hadn't done that. They'd been a decent enough family as families came, and I loved my dad fiercely. Despite the way I'd grown up, despite his seldom being there, despite everything. But I had always been on the outside. I'd had to work hard to belong, even when it seemed like I had a chance at belonging. And maybe I got why Dad hid who he really was from the world, a transgender man, an alien shapeshifter whose default state was definitely not Nordic human. I hadn't told Benedita about Dad being transgender. Like she said, that wasn't my story to tell. But I'd had a lot of conversations with her about closets. Closets were sometimes safest for deep wounds and unsafe places. Closets were sometimes the only way to survive. But closets could suffocate too. I stretched my wings, maintaining a lazy flap, mostly relying on my EM fields to keep me in flight. Strange how that all was becoming second nature. I couldn't go home. Not to the magnificence, not to my family's house and its quiet sanctuary. It was a place of tightness and suffocation. A place that demanded normal, and what the hell was normal, and why did a family that was partly from another planet require it? After the nanite crisis, hero teams around the world were looking for members to replace those who'd fallen or washed out. Maybe I could go to one of them, and Benedita would certainly give a recommendation. But was that what I wanted? To join another group, and have to try again to fit in? Watch them walk around me like I was breakable glass, tripping over pronouns? Because no matter where I went, what I could do, or what I looked like, being genderqueer would always be a part of it. Would I just have to get used to people projecting that subtle annoyance that I was making their lives harder? I'd never felt that with Benedita, and I hadn't known what my own normal felt like until then. All those weeks with Benedita seemed to fall away, and all the tension I'd felt after I'd first publicly come out buzzed back to me. I shouldn't have come to New York, not even to see Dad. Dad didn't need me. My family didn't need me. Even just being seen with me, if someone recognized me here and put the pieces together, might hurt their mending reputations. I tensed, my wings quivering. Watching my family, knowing they weren't really my family anymore. I couldn't ever go out doing hero work with them again. Or go home to my own room. Not looking like I did now. Not without hiding everything I was. I almost turned and fled. But Dad must have sensed something and turned. He came to a sharp stop midair. Even at this distance, I knew he recognized me. Well, how could he not? He broke off from Mom and my sister and flew toward me with them chasing after, though he stopped briefly to motion them back. My shoulders hunched. Was I that repulsive to him now, that he didn't want the rest of my family to see me up close? I could just barely see my mom throw up her hands in protest, then give an uncertain wave in my direction. Then blue flashed as she turned a bunch of clouds into ice and streaked off, leaving my sister darting to gather the hailstones before they could pelt the city. My family. How had I ever assumed that they were normal, and I was not? Dad hovered to a stop in front of me and my slowly flapping wings, his smile a little wavery. Hey, honey. You look good. I gaped at him and his lame attempt at a hello. My insides churned, then everything knotted up inside me was suddenly inevitably coming out. The fuck, Dad? I look good? You won't even let Mom come close. Do I remind you of your parents or something? Am I that awful to you? I mean, I knew you'd be watching the news and stuff. You had to have seen me and known it was me. It's not like you haven't had time to figure out how much I repulse. Arms crushed me in a hug. You're beautiful, he said, his words tight with sincerity. A sob ripped through me and I shoved him back, and he let me. I closed my eyes into the fading sun. I wanted to wrap my arms around myself, hold all I was feeling in, protect my fragile core, but that felt like weakness. Like betrayal of all I'd learned from myself, from Benedita. I thought about activating the chameleon programming in my suit, of looking normal to Dad, but that thought and what it meant only made my tears come harder. Honey, Dad said. I choose to live as human because it's the same thing as being male to me. I just am. I am human. But you aren't, and I see that, and I love you so much for that, you know? He sniffed, swiping at his eyes, which just made me cry harder. I can pass. I know maybe that's playing it safe. But it's where I'm at. I opened my mouth, not knowing what to say, just wanting to say something to make his two raw words stop. He held up a hand. Hear me out. Yes, I've seen you. I've seen that my kid will never not stand out. Will never have the easy life. You will always be extraordinary. I wanted to talk to you first, to say that first, before your mom. Well, you know your mom. She's not always tactful. I rubbed my scaled fingertips over the scaled edges of my face. My hands were shaking. Had he really just said what he'd said? Dad, I don't know what to do. They'll all figure out who I am sooner or later, some snarky blogger or something, they'll know who I am. My powers haven't, well, mostly changed. My scales are black and gold. I'm genderqueer. Seriously, they'll figure it out. And I'm not going to hide any of that. Your reputation. Dad gripped my hands, eyes flashing as he stared into mine. Honey. My wings snapped out. Don't call me that. Don't treat me like a kid. This is my life. And don't tell me you don't care about the family reputation. I know you do. My shoulders sagged, and I looked out over the city and the suburbs beyond. All of this had been my home, my first serious patrol ground for years. And it had been a place of so much pain for me. This city wouldn't welcome me. I shivered in the cool air, not daring to warm myself. To take any heat from Dad, because then this wouldn't be real. And he'd only be more afraid. I think, I said heavily, I just want to protect the world. Stay above it all. Be like a guardian angel or something. Be. My parents had named me Michaela, and I'd always hated my name, made such a fuss about it when I was younger that my parents had always just called me Honey. And when I thought about guardian angels now, I went straight to Michael, the masculine version of my birth name, but that didn't fit either. I told Dad not to call me Honey like a kid, but I had nothing else to put in its place. Here I was again, on the outside, between two extremes with no middle. I started to tremble more violently, my wings shaking with me. It would never end, would it? There'd never be a place for me in any of this. So be magnificent, Dad said. I give you my title. No magnificent man or magnificent woman, just magnificent. We'll change our family names. Your sister's been chafing against the girl part anyway, wanting to go out on her own. He gripped my hands tighter. Maybe that name's never been mine, always felt a bit cheesy for me, and maybe I've never lived up to it. But you. This one is yours. This one fits. You are magnificent. In every way magnificent. You're more a beacon of hope than I ever was. You are light itself, honey. Bring it everywhere you go. Light up the whole damn world, and let no one tell you can't. They can't stop you. You hear me? They can't stop magnificent. I gripped his hands back so hard I felt his bones creak, but he didn't protest. Tears streamed down my face, cold and wet. But I was warm inside. I had a freaking fire in my heart, and it had nothing to do with anger or pain. Was that what love felt like? Was that what it really, really felt like? Are you for real? Ha. Yes, really. I've been thinking about this, and I think maybe amazingly awesome man might be the name for me. Dad. I punched him, just enough that he drifted back a few feet. Seriously. Ow. He rubbed his chest in cartoonish, exaggerated pain, making me laugh despite myself. Like he'd done when I was a kid. Those good memories. Those few good memories that now stood out like beacons, lighting past the bad ones. He grinned, then it softened into a smile. I really have been thinking about it. Since I saw you last. And now, look at you. You can fly above it all, but you don't have to not have a place on Earth. You're my kid. You'll always be my kid. And I'll tell everyone I know you're my kid if you want me to. You're the bravest person I know. And I was crying again. Okay, I said. Okay. I'll be magnificent. Yes, all right. He beamed at me. We were both sniffling, the cold wind drying snot on our faces. We were a mess. But I was magnificent. Those girls in the bathroom at school hadn't seen it. My parents, when I was younger, hadn't seen it. My sister hadn't seen it. Benedita had. Oh, Benedita. She'd been pushing me so I could see it. And when I'd started to, that's when everything changed. My dad saw it now. And maybe he thought he gave this to me, this title, or maybe he was doing what Benedita had, letting me fly on my own. But no one could give me what I already was, could they? No one could take it from me. Ever. Dad fished into one of the pockets around his waist and tossed me something shiny. I caught a set of keys. There's an apartment a few miles from our place. It's not big, but it's furnished, and we've got 6 months' rent down. The address is on the keychain. I clutched the keys, half afraid they might fall away. My own place? Possibilities sprang around me like sunbeams. But, Dad, you can't, we don't have the money to. Another thought hit me in the gut. I said in a small voice, are you kicking me out? God, no. You can live wherever you want. But every hero needs a place of their own. A home base where they can be whoever they need to be off duty. This one's yours. I clutched the keys more tightly. I've been thinking about taking some time off. Time to really spend with my family. Hindsight, right? He took a breath, raked through his hair. I can teach you how to control your shape-shifting if you want, to preserve our civilian identities when you're at home, but I don't expect you to hide yourself, so if you don't want to do that, we can come to you or... My eyes welled again. No, he wasn't kicking me out. He was telling me he understood that I needed to be who I was. That I didn't have to hide it. Like Benedita, he was giving me as many options as he could. Dad spread his hands. And if you want to come home and don't want to hide, we'll figure it out. We will. We're in this together, you know? And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't there for you before. That there wasn't time to be there for you. There was time I didn't make it. I'm here for you now. My dad understood. He really did. He wasn't just Magnificent Man, the former Magnificent Man, suburban alien dad, or even the Magnificent Man that had been the heartthrob of the 80s. He wasn't just the plumber he played as his normal life cover, and he wasn't just my dad. Before all of that, he'd been a kid who'd found out who he was, and his whole world rejected him for it. He'd been someone who just wanted to be loved. He'd found that love. A whole lot of love. A world full of love. And he was giving it back to me. With shaking hands, I managed to slip the keys into one of my suit pockets, before it was my turn to crush him in a hug. Maybe the world wouldn't get me. Maybe not, at least at first. But Benedita did. And now my dad, oh my dad. And then the rest of my family arrived in a tentative, nervous tangle. Hey honey, Mom said, and kept looking between me and Dad, a slow and wicked smile curving her lips. Was she imagining what he'd look like with scales, and oh God, was that heat rising in her what I thought it was, gross? Parents. My sister punched me lightly on the shoulder. I like your wings. How'd you do that? That's pretty awesome. I definitely want to try it. Do you think I could get my eyelids to scale, like a permanent eyeshadow or something? I blinked. My family. My totally crazy, imperfect family. But they were mine. They were here. My heart swelled with hope. Later, I flew. From high above, from up in orbit, the Earth doesn't look smaller, only more condensed. The joy is more condensed, the hate, the love. The sparks, the fires, the light. This was my home. Beautiful and terrifying and ever-changing, one person and family at a time. I'd stand between my world and anyone who wanted to beat it down. To beat anyone down, because everyone deserved to be loved for who they were. Everyone. Even me. A note from the author. Thank you for reading, and I hope you enjoyed Magnificent. If you loved it, please consider leaving a review on your favorite review sites. Reviews are the best way to help an indie author. If you're looking for more science fiction and fantasy with trans and non-binary characters, check out The Truth Spoken Air, The Stars and Green Magic Season 1, also by me, Novae Caelum, which features queer royal shapeshifters in space with magic. For more information on my books and how to sign up for my newsletter and get a free ebook, check out https://novaecaelum.com.